Excerpt from how exercise could help you learn a new language. Many scientists suspect that exercise alters the biology of the brain in ways that make it more malleable and receptive to new information, a process that scientists refer to as plasticity. But many questions have remained unanswered about movement and learning, including whether exercise is most beneficial before, during, or after instruction, and how much and what types of exercise might be best. So for a new study, which was published recently in PLOS One, researchers in China and Italy decided to home in on language learning and the adult brain. Language learning is interesting. As young children, almost all of us picked up our first language easily. We didn't have to be formally taught, we simply absorbed words and concepts. But by early adulthood, the brain generally begins to lose some of its innate language capability. It displays less plasticity in areas of the brain related to language. As a result, for most of us, it becomes harder to learn a second language after childhood.
So again, we have an example of a passage with only 2 3-sentence paragraphs. We have to kind of piece them together. So let's take a look at the first 5 paragraphs. Essentially, exercise alters the biology of the brain. It makes you receptive to new information, which we call plasticity. But questions remain, so there's going to be a new study. Paragraphs 4 and 5 tell us that as young children, we have that plasticity. We can learn languages, but by adulthood, that goes away and it's harder to learn a language.
To see what effects exercise might have on this process, the researchers first recruited 40 college-age Chinese men and women who were trying to learn English. The students had some facility with this second language but were far from proficient. And the researchers then divided the students into 2 groups. Those in one group would continue to learn English as they had before, primarily while seated in rote vocabulary memorization sessions. The others would supplement these sessions with exercise. And specifically, the students would ride exercise bikes at a gentle pace, about 60% of their maximum aerobic capacity, beginning 20 minutes before the start of the lessons and continuing throughout the 15 minutes or so of instruction. Both groups learned their new vocabulary by watching words projected onto large screens, together with comparable pictures, such as apple and a red delicious. They were shown 40 words per session, with the sequence repeated several times. Then afterward, the students all rested briefly and then completed a vocabulary quiz, using computer keys to note as quickly as possible whether a word was with its correct picture. They also responded to sentences using the new words, marking whether the sentences were accurate or, in the case of the apple is a dentist, nonsensical. Most linguists feel that understanding sentences shows greater mastery of a new language than does simple vocabulary improvement. The students completed 8 vocabulary sessions over the course of 2 months.
Paragraph 6 outlines for us what the purpose of the study is, to see the effects exercise might have on this language learning process. So they took 40 recruits trying to learn English, and they divided the students into 2 groups. One group would learn as before, but the others would supplement with exercise. Specifically, the students who were riding went through this particular routine, and both learned the vocabulary the same way, however, by watching words projected onto the screens. Afterward, so they just described the study parameters and process for us. Afterward, they rested briefly and then completed a vocabulary quiz. The students completed 8 such vocabulary sessions over the course of 2 months. So they're describing what the study structure was and how it was set up.
And at the end of each lesson, the students who had ridden bikes performed better on the subsequent vocabulary tests than did the students who sat still. And they also became more proficient at recognizing proper sentences than the sedentary students, although that difference did not emerge until after several weeks of instruction. Perhaps most interesting, the gains in vocabulary and comprehension lingered longest for the cyclists. When the researchers asked the students to return to the lab for a final round of testing a month after the lessons, without practicing in the meantime, the cyclists remembered words and understood them in sentences more accurately than did the students who had not moved. The results suggest that physical activity during learning improves that learning, says Simone Sulpizio, a professor of psychology and linguistics at the University Vita Salute San Raffaele in Milan, Italy, and a study co-author. These improvements extend beyond simply aiding in memorization, she added. The exercise also deepened language learners' grasp of how to use their newly acquired words.
In this section, it says the students who had ridden bikes performed better on the subsequent vocabulary tests. So now we're transitioning from the study details to the conclusions. The exercising or cycling students did better. They also became more proficient at recognizing proper sentences, and even most interesting, possibly, their gains in vocabulary and comprehension lingered longest. So these results suggest that physical activity during learning improves that learning, and it deepened the language learner's grasp of how to use their newly acquired words. So exercise helps learning the new language.
This study involved college students performing relatively light exercise, though, and cannot tell us whether other people completing other types of exercise would achieve the same results. It also offers no clues about what is occurring inside the brain that might be contributing to the benefits of the exercise. But many past studies have shown that exercise prompts the release of multiple neurochemicals in the brain that increase the number of new brain cells and the connections between neurons, Dr. Sulpizio says. These effects improve the brain's plasticity and augment the ability to learn. From a real-world standpoint, the study's implications might seem at first to be impractical. Few classrooms are equipped with stationary bicycles. But specialized equipment is probably unnecessary, Dr. Sulpizio says. And we are not suggesting that schools or teachers buy lots of bicycles, she says. A simpler take-home message may be that instruction should be flanked by physical activity.
So these are, now we're looking at the fundamental weaknesses or possible holes in this study. It also offers no clues about what is occurring inside the brain. So although they're learning better, we don't really know why or how that's happening. But there is a possible explanation here. From a real-world standpoint, the study implications might seem at first impractical. So are they impractical? You can't put a stationary bike in the class, of course. We're not suggesting that schools buy lots of bicycles. Now they're being kind of silly. It's facetious. Of course you're not going to buy bicycles. A simpler take-home message may be that the instruction should be flanked by physical activity. So the suggestion here, the takeaway, is that you should do physical activity to help you learn better. They go hand in hand. So again, who's telling this? This is essentially a third person giving us an informative essay on a science topic. It's very typical. You're not going to get complete black and white. So we start off with the sort of problem or hypothesis. We review the test design. We get the results. And then we review the possible weaknesses or shortcomings of the study. Well, we cannot conclude from that. That's very typical for a passage on the SHSAT. It's not going to be definitively one way or another always. There are going to be some pros and cons, maybe different opinions weighed against each other. So look out for these changes and shifts within the passages.